One was a civil rights case in Chicago where in the 70s and 80s, a police commander named John Burge regularly tortured subjects that they had arrested, he and his team. And that would be through beatings, through suffocations, and even a Vietnam era crank phone that would conduct electricity, and they would put the clips on the genitals of the subjects to force confessions out of them.
Wow.
And these victims were almost exclusively black males. So in the city at that time, there were whispers, there were rumors, there were accusations. Chicago police did nothing. The FBI did nothing.
Welcome back to Too Light, Too Dark. Now, there's a line most of us never have to cross, a line between order and chaos, between safety and something far darker. Today's guest has lived on that line. He is a former FBI agent who spent years stepping into the kinds of situations the rest of us only see in headlines or in Hollywood or on TV series. These threats were real, the stakes were life and death in some cases, and the people on the other side, not characters, but human beings operating in the shadows. Today, we're going to explore both sides of the human experience, not just what's out there, but what's inside here. So today we're asking, what does it take to face the darkest parts of society, and what does that reveal about ourselves? So, with these flowers of introduction, I'm delighted to welcome Eric Robinson to the show.
Thank you very much, Leon. I appreciate it.
So to kick us off, the origin story, what unique qualities does it actually take to be a good FBI agent beyond what I see on Hollywood, the films and TV series?
Yeah, the principles that make a good FBI agent don't make for a a very good action movie because it so much of it is patience. One of the mandates for the FBI is to work long-term criminal enterprise cases where we're finding the breadth and the depth of groups. And so the patience, the curiosity to keep working, even when you feel like you have all the information, being open to what more might be there. And, that persistence of carrying through because there are going to be countless times in an agent's life. And I would remind the new agents and assure them when they would come on that there's going to be so many roadblocks in the way, and those come from informants. They might come from the FBI itself. It comes from prosecutors stymieing you, and you just have to accept that that's going to happen, move with it, and do your best to get that conviction that's necessary.
So I suppose resilience seems to be one of the key things that's jumping out there,
Yeah.
um, and patience. And I wonder, just to drill into you a little bit, Eric, was that something that you had from early doors? Like, what was your kind of genesis to get to that point?
Well, it was. I feel like I have much of that naturally. The FBI hires good professionals who are self-starters, who are overcomers, and so that was the morale and the attitude of the FBI when I came in. So it was easy to move into that, but it's also learning of, you know, sometimes I'll go to my barn and do woodworking, and you can spend 3 hours on a project and then screw something a little too hard and you crack it. And so I can either, start screaming, swearing, and throwing things, or just take a moment and realize, okay, now I've got to find a way to fix this and move around it. And that then applied in the FBI when early in my career, we're trying to make cases. We've got 10 guys that we want to charge. Prosecutors say, no, we're only going to give you 6. And you just have to now deal with that and move forward rather than throw a fit.
And thinking about, I suppose, the UK model, my perception has always been that you are a law enforcement officer. So in this country, you'd be start off in uniform, and then you sort of work the streets a little bit, work the beat, if you will. Then you make that sort of graduation into detective work after you've sort of you've cut your teeth on the streets, Eric. Is that a similar kind of journey to what happens for the FBI?
4 months at the FBI Academy, and then boot in the ass, and you're in the deep end. Here you go. you know, I hope you know how to swim, because here we are. So there's as much training as they can provide during that time of how to run investigations, understand the law, handle firearms, handle prisoners, and then now you're slowly becoming a better and better agent, trying to learn from what's going on around you. As I was in the FBI for 15, 20, 24 years, you start to get on the tail end, and you're the guy who knows how to do things, and you have that experience. But then the new folks come in and they're learning from you, but then I'm trying to grab the energy from them, because you come in, you're like, I can do anything. Let's go, let's go. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that. Thanks for the energy. I'm gonna latch onto you, and then I'm gonna steer you along the way. But we're gonna use that enthusiasm you have to get things done.
Hmm. And I was thinking about what the education smarts, and again, I'm going to make an assumption here, Eric, and assumption is often a key to a punch in the face, as I say. But I was thinking about the educational smarts, so I'm thinking probably interest in criminal justice, law, maybe cybersecurity nowadays, or computer sciences, foreign languages, and then I think interesting in this podcast space is the psychology of it all as well. Is that some of the sort of key tenets, what would make up a good FBI agent?
Well, those are definitely backgrounds that the Bureau looks to bring people in from. So, yeah, you've got foreign language abilities. That's always been a key. Cybersecurity issues, IT things that that's going to be winsome to the applicant coordinator drawing you in. However, they're wide open. The FBI wants to have a diverse background of people with different experiences and educations. We can get cops whenever we want to. We can get military at any time, and those people have very valuable backgrounds and experiences to provide input. But then there's also somebody who comes from a completely different perspective, and we want that to blend with others. And I keep saying we, I'm retired, but the FBI wants that to blend with others to have a better concept, rather than that siloed notion of this is only what cops think.
Hmm. Got you. And the last bit in terms of the process and what makes up what's ingredients to an agent is around there's obviously physical fitness is going to be huge as well, and then on top of that as well, like I'd imagine if there's 100 people who would apply to join the bureau, there's only going to be a percentage that are selected. But without knowing, again, a little bit an assumption, Eric, but maybe you can help our listeners understand that.
Yeah, the application process goes through, first they got to see, are you hitting the standards, that you have a college degree? Are you within certain ages? And then that coordinator is going to go through and say, okay, these are ones that I think are good to move on to the next phase. Next phase is going to be taking a test that's like an SAT or a college entrance test. And I remember when I took it, I went, oh, at least I tried. And I walked away, and then the FBI called me back, and I said, oh, I guess I did better than I thought. And from there, it's going to be another round of written test and interviews. At that point, for me, I felt like, okay, I've got this. I can speak. I can express myself in writing. And then there's the physical fitness. And what's crazy is so many people, and they know what the standards are. And you can go online and watch protocol. So many applicants wash out there. They're not ready. They don't prepare the way they should. And then and then there'll be the background, and sometimes that digs up dirt on people, and the polygraph. And it's crazy that there's oftentimes people think they can sneak things through the polygraph, and they
Wow.
can't. And I had one applicant when I was in Chicago, Illinois, came through, and I had failed him. I was a fitness instructor. I had failed him on the test because the first event was sit-ups, and I took a few off, and he missed it by one. But he gave great effort in every other event, ran the mile and a half as fast as he could. And I went to our coordinator and I said, maybe I miscounted. Let's give him enough because he showed effort, even though he didn't even have to be there for the rest of the time. She said, okay. And we passed him through. And then I followed up later and I said, hey, how's this kid doing? Because I'd give him a speech of like, make the most of this moment. You got a chance you shouldn't have. And she said he bombed the polygraph because he lied about all sorts of criminal behavior on his application and they caught him on it. So I almost let a felon into the FBI.
Just get it on a t-shirt. Um, and just thinking about the younger you, little Eric, if you will, or wee Eric, as we say in Scotland.
Hey.
Was that something that you'd always dreamed of doing growing up, and or did you kind of fall into it? Like, what was the process there?
I, on the one hand, people ask, well, why did you join the FBI? And I'm just bemused. The answer is because it's super cool. So I didn't dream of it like this is the job I always wanted. But when I came to a crossroads in my career, I thought, well, this could be really great. And I have one friend who tells me about how, from when I was 12, I wanted to be FBI. So I studied this in college. I did this for my master's, took these jobs, and then she got the job. And so Eric, what brought you into the FBI? And I'm like, on a whim, I
Mm.
applied.
Yeah, both things can be true at once, right?
Right. Well, and I have another buddy who went to Princeton, and he would tell me about all the great people he graduated with and amazing things that they're doing. And I tell him like, hey man, I just went to a regular old college, and here we both are. However, all those guys that you think are doing great things, you're on an FBI SWAT team. They all wish they were you. They they dream that they could have the life that you're having, and it was such a blessing.
Hmm. Now, when I think of the FBI, I think of these harrowing cases, and I think of working with some dark people or monsters in inverted commas, but essentially it's human beings at the end of the day. And what's maybe something unexpected you experienced while working in the FBI? Can you pull out something specific?
I can. I don't know that you want that on your podcast, but there's been some crazy things when you go into someone's home and they're not expecting you there. There's a level of voyeurism to that where like you're looking through their computers, you're looking through their phones, you're looking through their house, and you see what people are really like, and some of it is disgusting, and some of it is just embarrassing. But boy, I mean the amount it's all sexual. I mean, which is
Mm.
fine. That's how people live, and they expect to be private about it. But like the number of sex toys and things like we once carried like a laundry basket full of sex toys out of one house where the guy had been offending, and just makes you wonder how many of those that you actually need.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you really need 74 different ones, right?
Right. I mean, I figure three for variety, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes us somewhat traditional, I feel, in a certain way.
Very conservative. I'm very conservative in my sex toy beliefs.
Yeah, yeah, my I've only got 3 in my laundry basket, thank you very much. Um, and just a sort of follow-up to that is, and this is a real a peak interest for me, is psychologically, how do you prepare yourself to walk into rooms that anybody else in their right mind would be walking out of?
Yeah, so that's pertinent to me because I'm just 3 months retired, and not only as FBI agent, but in the FBI as a SWAT operator, where we would go. That's what we did, and I remember nearing retirement, talking to a buddy who was also close to retirement. And he said, "Yeah, I talked to my therapist, and he said." how much do you identify with being an FBI agent? And he said, a lot. And his therapist said, well, that's going to be a problem. And
Mm.
and I told him, I said, brother, that's what I've been struggling with because I have been that person. So for the majority of my adulthood, I have been that person who says, here we go. We're going in and we're prepared for it. To your question though, when that is your identity, when that is what you've practiced, when you know that you are competent and able to do this, and here's a guy next to you who is at least as competent as you are, there's no fear in it. There's only wanting to perform at your best level. So the only fear that I ever had going into those dangerous situations was I didn't want to let my buddy down. I didn't want to miss a movement in tactics that was wrong. I didn't want to embarrass myself. I wasn't afraid of what would happen. I just wanted to be that best supporter of those who are entrusting themselves to me.
Hmm. And I was thinking about the psychology of this, and then I was also thinking about psychology plus identity.
Mm.
It's fundamentally, I would imagine something so immersive in that bureau, it shapes how you live, how you present yourself, the demands in terms of the discipline and the privacy. Is there two separate yous, if that makes sense? Can you separate from the job when you go home? Like what's the effect there? Just to help me understand there.
There has to be self-reflection. I don't know how all other agents managed, but for me, there had to be a self-reflection on how is this affecting me. So I had to be mindful. I can't just go do it and then have these outbursts or depression or something and not even understand why. I needed to recognize what I'm being exposed to and what that might be doing to me to get that ounce of medicine early. And there's definitely times and exposures where I would talk to a buddy, not in a counseling sort of way, but just opening this idea where we're speaking it aloud to each other and having someone like-minded who's compassionate enough not to, just bust chops, but to just discuss it. For example, first 5 years of my career in Chicago, we investigated Mexican drug cartels. So every Mexican I encountered was dealing drugs, helping the guy deal drugs, driving him, and he knows there's drugs, hiding things for him. All like all Mexicans I'm interacting with were criminal or immoral. And I had to recognize I know this is not true, but I have to confront it with myself lest I develop a bias in saying, yeah, Mexicans are a horrible group of people across the board because I know it's not true. And yet early on, that has to be a discussion with myself.
Mm. Yeah, and it leaves you in that spot where, and again, shoot me down in flames if I get this wrong. Like you can't carry stuff alone, but then you need to build separation from and some objectivity. You need to accept in some way that this work is going to change you, and be wholly accepting of that. Whilst at the same time staying physically and mentally disciplined. And I suppose the big one is, Eric, that you need to identify how to use professional support real early before things get out of hand, like you say about biases, Eric, right?
Yeah. And and I'll call them small t traumatic events that we would go through, you know, literally we're in life and death situations I was on a weekly basis. It didn't feel like it. And, when I say life and death, here's a bunch of guys with guns behind vehicles, and over the PA, we call the criminal out and he comes out. Well, okay. It could have been life and death, but it wasn't. But in many of these traumatic situations, I found that the way that agents handled that is by telling stories. It's by expressing it. And so in retrospect, I see that these were survivor stories
Mm.
where like we're always laughing, but you're laughing almost like, oh my gosh, that was dangerous. And yet, as we talk about it, here we are. We're on the other side of it. But now let's look back and just open up about it, of how crazy that adventure was, and yet we survived.
Hmm. Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose living in these high stakes environments every day, um, a good question I thought is how does that shape the way you read people in everyday life?
It opens my eyes more. I mean, well, yeah, actually, you're a bad example because you have a good bit of exposure to some of the darkness in society, but civilians know that there's bad things out there, but unless you've been seeing it, you kind of, it's easier to dismiss. So part of that is just being aware without having a paranoia or a fear or a cynicism about everyone. But part of that too is just knowing that people can go that way unless they turn from it. So one example is we arrested this guy who was involved in a pretty significantly disgusting paraphilia that was the most shocking thing that I may not be good for your podcast. But part of it is we then interviewed him and he said, "Yeah, I was exposed to pornography at age 12 and I just kept going further and further down that road, needing something worse, needing something worse." We were there to arrest him for distribution of child pornography, but these other things he was involved in too, while not illegal, were very base. And you see how he at no time found a way to turn around, find a new path. He just kept going down it until he was in a very dark place.
Yeah, it's in my experience, it's one of them things that might start off quite a Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke, if you will. But the more exposure to it, there's only one way that it goes, Eric. You
Yeah.
never sort of go back and give up. Once you start on that pathway, it's a very steep downhill journey from there. I feel right.
Yeah, if there's no intervention, if there's no inner strength,
Yeah,
then you will keep taking one step after another. Most people don't do that. Most people make a misstep, purposely choose the wrong way, and then say, I don't want to be that person. I'm going to find a way back. And that could be one step, it could be a mile down the road. But most people say, I don't want to be like this. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to find the strength myself. And then here was someone, for whatever reason, who just continued in that, likely trying to soothe some pain or trauma that he had had, and it never was enough. And he had to find something greater along the way.
and I was thinking about the. I'm really interested in what makes people tick and people's motivations and drives and that then manifests in behavior. And I've done a lot of self analysis to understand that. And I've kind of cooked this down. And maybe you can give me the FBI agent lens on this as well. So I was thinking about how environment matters more than people think. So the kind of socio or the psychodynamic circle that you grow up in and the psychosocial circle that you grow up in. Um, if I think about my own tendency to do wrong things or illegal things, I think about immediate reward over long-term consequence. Then I think about kind of my peer group as well, like social influence and trying to belong to the pack, how that can have an effect. Then I have a think about the psychological factors around poor impulse control, addiction, personality disorder, trauma, unresolved anger, and then sort of telling myself stories, rationale that is based on distorted thinking. And then I suppose the last bit I was thinking about is the opportunity as well. And I think if you get all them markers in one pie, there's a good recipe for somebody that's probably going to make illegal, poor, bad, in inverted commas decisions. What's your takeaway on that?
Absolutely. I mean, across the board, f- the the criminals that I encountered many times were some are going to have, and I'm going to make assumptions because I didn't do studies on them. I mean, some have that catalyst inside them genetically that if exposed to this, then this, and they were the ones exposed. So, there's going to be a higher proclivity for someone to engage in criminal activity. However, the environment they were in, whether that's the drug dealers I investigate in Chicago, the gangs I investigated in Chicago. I worked with runaway teen girls who were prostituting. They're not prostituting because of genetics. Like they're doing it because of their environment is in a sense forcing them to for survival. So many of these people are uh, influenced or driven, and some are now going towards those circles for the purpose of getting the strength and encouragement to commit the crimes that inside they actually want to do. So now they're getting like they're going to go to circles that say, "Yeah, let's go do criminal activity," and they're directing themselves towards it because that's what they want in the first place.
Hmm. You mentioned working with gangs in Chicago. Can you give me just a little taste of what that was like day on day? Because obviously I read, and then my 22-year-old son listens to a lot of music that's influenced heavily by that scene. What was some of the things that you've seen day on day over there? Because yeah, my 22-year-old will be interested by this part for sure, Eric.
Well, I'll probably disappoint a bit, but this was early 2000s in Chicago, and the gangs were very violent that time. I haven't kept up to see what's going on there now. My sense is that we were kind of at one of the peaks of the violence and the drug sales, and the gangs were a place where young men who saw no place in society and were probably told this either directly or through circumstances, look to have a bond of people around them. I mean, there's something noble in the idea that these people will kill for each other. And I was on a SWAT team. I mean, that was a concept there. There was a brotherhood. The basis for it, the foundation, was illegal activities and, often um, just bringing harms to their community, harming women many times through promoting prostitution. But young men were finding a place where they could belong. This is what they wanted. And they were finding a place where they could enrich themselves when they didn't believe that they could find that through the standard traditional means. Here's an opportunity to make money and to support your family too. So, yeah, there was a lot noble about it in its practices, except that it was built on a foundation of criminality.
And it's interesting. Again, I'm a father to now a young man, and I've got a little one as well. And that male role modeling piece is so vital in growing up. And I think it's always you have to be careful when speaking about gangs as some sort of monolithic organization. It's like and being casual about that as well, because I think a lot of them are built on their what's perceived as fluid networks and relationships, but it's around peer regulation. It's about what's going
Yeah.
on at home or what's not going on at home or should be going on at home, and there's like a power vacuum in that as well, and it's pulling in young people within that. So again, I'm really careful about how I frame that as well, Eric, because it's not just as simple as saying it's the gang, right? It's a lot more complicated than that.
Yes. And, of course, again, we weren't getting into the full psychology of it, but it being around the gangs and interviewing the subjects, you are learning from it. I mean, our goal was just like, can we get a gun buy? Can we get a drug buy? Can we target the most violent of the members? But I remember living in Chicago. I was inside the city. We were in what was called an up and coming neighborhood, which means it's still bad, but it used to be worse.
Gotcha.
And I remember, looking out the window on a summer night, and there's a bunch of, 12 to 15-year-old kids out there causing ruckus, hitting cars. And I went out once as the guys are like, play fighting, but like swinging bats at each other. And I very sternly said, "You guys got to go home. Get out of the streets." And I was pissed, and I had my gun on me. I wasn't threatening them, but just in case. And I was pissed that this is always the case. Like, here's a bunch of young kids in the street doing nothing of value, and then one like probably 12-year-old kid comes to me. He goes, "Do you know what time it is?" And I said, "Yeah, man, it's after 10 o'clock." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, would you mind walking me home? Because my mom's going to be mad." And like, now I melt because this is it. This is what's going on. He just has a mom, maybe a grandma too. There's no father figure. And all that he has is monkeying around with a couple older kids and learning violence. But mom wants to keep him straight. She's going to yell at him. He respects that. And that's just a snapshot of how things go in some of the hard scrabble parts of the big city.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and yeah, moving from Chicago, I was thinking about, yeah, there's an inside story. So something I read when preparing for the interview around award-winning investigations. Can you just give me a flavor of what they were exactly? If there's more than one, or if there's one you just like to focus on, because I was really interested in reading about it.
You think I've only worked one award-winning investigation? You're selling me short. No, I got to be. I was very fortunate to be part of two investigations that won Attorney General's awards, and that's one of the highest honors in the FBI. One was a civil rights case in Chicago, where in the 70s and 80s, a police commander named John Burge regularly tortured subjects that they had arrested, he and his team. And that would be through beatings, through suffocations, and even a Vietnam era crank phone that would conduct electricity, and they would put the clips on the genitals of the subjects to force confessions out of them.
Wow.
And these victims were almost exclusively black males. So in the city at that time, there were whispers, there were rumors, there were accusations. Chicago police did nothing. The FBI did nothing. But my buddy Jake led the case with our team. And 25 years after the fact, we ended up getting charges of perjury and obstruction of justice on him, which were far less than what he should have gotten, but it was the best that we could do so far after the fact because he had lied under oath saying he had no knowledge of torture in his area. So it was a small victory that we got something, but it was a significant case for the city of Chicago.
Wow. And was there, going through that process as well, was there any sort of kickback from the system as things started to be uncovered? How did you navigate that?
Well, it was difficult because it's not like we're going to subpoena phone records because it's 20 years after. It was all interviews, and it was interviews of people trying to remember 15, 10, 20 years ago. And so that was difficult. The majority of interviews were with the victims, and these victims were actual criminals. So we're talking to individuals who were rapists, murderers, arsonists. They were bad people. They went to prison for their crimes, and yet the police can't do what they did to them. They should not be torturing people to get confessions. And I'll entertain that if a father wants to torture a criminal because he assaulted his daughter, I'll entertain that idea, but the government cannot do that and cannot be a part of it.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow, what a case. Um, Now you've also worked on cases involving terrorists, shooters, murderers. Um, is there a specific pattern or personality type, or is there something that you see in terms of themes that you go, okay, I can see where this happened? Can you just walk us down that path a little bit?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's usually seeing that pattern after the fact, looking back. We had a couple of cases where we had potential mass shooters, and when I say potential, like they had the intent. one of the subjects says, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure we would have done it." So it's not like we were just preventing what could have been; we were preventing what was going to be. And oftentimes, on the one hand, there could be ideology. So we've had both Muslim and white supremacists who have carried out or are threatening to carry out attacks based on their ideals. One was a white kid with red hair who pledged himself to ISIS and was prepared to shoot up a synagogue. And that was all out of ideology. That had nothing to do with something in his life. Another group was a pair of shooters who had just like gone down a path of depression and wanting a change in their lives. They needed to turn the clock and start over. And damn if the best way to do that isn't just to completely change your life by being a mass shooter. And unfortunately in America, that is an option. Like that's on the table of, what can I do to completely change my life? That is a legitimate option that we have in the United States. And they were well prepared to pick that route, having everything ready. Um, they were set up to go to their favorite bar, and they had it mapped out of where they would be to have the greatest kill zone. And we took them out, having introduced an undercover, an informant to get more information from them, and then stop them before they could do that.
Wow. And just thinking about, because again, in the UK, you always get the thing, how really, because guns are so prevalent in America, is there any surprise why there's school shootings and things of that nature? But what's your sort of stance on the Constitution when it comes to the right to bear arms? Um, is it your opinion that yeah, they should be banned because you deal with the real time consequences, or should we be able to protect ourselves from tyranny, which I think is is the founding father version, right?
Yeah, that's how it started. And then U.S. court rulings adopted the idea that, well, you should be able to protect your domicile from anyone. And I will start with the uncontroversial opinion that cannot be argued with, which is people who should not own guns should not own guns.
Yeah.
And as a tautology, you can't argue with that one. But
No.
there's a step there that now how are you going to define that? And I have plenty of ideas to that. My more ridiculous idea is we could solve two problems in America at once if there were no guns. Because if there are no guns, okay, you're going to solve a violence problem, and also you're going to solve the obesity problem. Because if I don't have a gun, the only way I can have power over you is to get really fit and maybe do jujitsu or taekwondo. And so now America's getting fit because if you're so afraid of those guys attacking you in your house, you're like, well, I better be ready to box.
Mm,
So two problems at once.
there you go.
There I
Wow.
go.
Um, now, thinking about perspectives and where you sit now, obviously you're retired. Um, and when you look at the news and when you look at algorithms and information spouted at us, and then all the different kind of political sides and noise, how does that affect how you see current events? Do things you think look different to you when you've actually lived inside the world that you have in the FBI?
Oh, absolutely. So I was never stationed at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. I have had plenty of buddies who have been, and there's also then interaction. And so, I've gotten a little more sense from where I am of how the politics work as different administrations affect law enforcement, the Department of Justice for us. And and then also I have a better understanding, which is a bit of a calming factor of what law enforcement is actually doing. So sometimes those blaring headlines, they don't hit me because I can assume a broader truth that's there. That this is just somebody trying to catch attention when in reality, it's probably not quite that. So I think having had an inside view, it just it mutes things a little bit more.
Yeah. I suppose it helps you understand the reality in amongst numerous talking points that have all got their own slanted agenda. Eric, is that a fair comment?
I think so. I think so. And again, just knowing, like when there's crazy stories about the FBI, I know that 99.5% of the FBI is just trying to do what's right and wants nothing to do with the crazy headlines. So for me, I look at it and I go, well, that's too bad that the Bureau's getting this negative attention. But, my buddies are just doing their best and trying to do what's right. So I'll just let those headlines fly and know that we're doing what's right.
Yeah, and I suppose the politics influence the system. Policy directs priorities, but I suppose it's up to you to try and be as impartial and neutral and amongst all that different sort of wind and turbulence, right?
Yeah, I mean the policies will have a little trickle down effect. By the time it gets to the field, it's just a mist, and priorities can be pushed forward. But as always, it comes down to, is someone actually committing a crime? So you can want to target certain groups or have an emphasis, but if those guys aren't in front of us, if we don't have informants in on them, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's necessary for us to see people actually committing crimes.
Gotcha. I was also thinking about now that you're retired, and I suppose it's been a few months now. Like, what does that feel like? Are you still in that sort of novelty phase? Have you thought about maybe what's next and what's coming up in the next iteration for you, Eric?
Well, I'm in the phase where I'm just 3 months retired. So having retired, it's nice to get rest. So that's one. So I'm finally getting rest. But for 24 years, I carried my FBI phone on me, and I tell my buddies, you think you know what it's like to give up that thing, but you have no idea. It weighs 4 ounces, and yet it weighs 100 pounds. So I like about a week into retirement, there's a commercial that has the same clanging noise as our SWAT call out notification. And I'm
Mm,
sitting in bed watching TV, and that commercial had that noise, and I shot up, and I mean, that's PTSD right there. Like, oh, here I go. I got, like, my first thought is, am I available? What, you know, put pants on and go.
yeah.
But next up is, I've written a book that
Mm,
details my stories, some of these crazy things that we talked about, and that'll be coming out in the fall. So the hook to the story that I have is that I started out not as an FBI agent, but I started out 12 years as a Baptist pastor
mm.
before moving into the FBI. So I have a bit of a unique story of coming from that environment, and that's a thread that runs through the book of what would happen if you took a Baptist pastor, plucked him out of the pulpit, and you stuck him in the FBI for 24 years. And this guy's never handled a gun before, but let's see what happens.
Hmm. And yeah, writing that book, um, yeah, that is an interesting story as a Baptist minister, because there's a load of kind of connections around that. There's like a solid foundation that's based on faith, and then working in that sort of strict, impartial, non-political. Let's look at the criminal. Let's look at the worst people. But again, I suppose for a Baptist minister, the whole thing needs to be steeped in acceptance and forgiveness. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the forgiveness isn't for me. The I saw it more as doing God's work to bring justice.
Mm, okay.
So the church can't do that. The church can do many things, but if you have been wronged, the church cannot bring justice. And so I have always felt that is something God wants, and I got to be a part of fulfilling that justice as much as I could for other people. So it felt very much like still doing God's work. It felt like a noble pursuit too.
And yeah, I often assume that after the FBI, as a Baptist minister, there seems to be a road back home there for you in some sense, right?
I've got all the sermon illustrations now all ready to go.
But then also, I suppose there's the opportunities for advisory, consulting roles. I'd assume that there's maybe some opportunities afterwards in terms of mentorship and leadership, thinking about the career you've had and awards that you've won as well, Eric, because fundamentally you can help shape and form the next batch that are going to come through, right?
Yeah, and that's something that's foremost in my mind of without sounding arrogant, the FBI gave me a lot of good skills of learning how to teach firearms, tactics, the knowledge of casework and interrogations, and I'd like to be able to pass that on. I know how sparse, in many ways, police training is. You know, they get the academy, they get as much as they can, and then they get very little training many times beyond that. So, looking for a space to provide that to law enforcement to make them safer and also understand, I think, the proprieties and the ethics in the job so they can carry out their job in the way that I saw the FBI do our job.
Great. Now, before I come to our dessert questions today, I've always got a little bit in our podcast that I've just put in recently that is called Three Pillars. And that's to help our listeners understand a little bit more about the person and some of their taste and what inspires them. And so the three pillars are books, there are movies, and then I always land on music. So books wise, is there a book that captures the psychological or moral reality of your work, something that made you think this gets it right?
Yeah, so I'll throw two at you. One is Inside the Criminal Mind by Stanton Samanow. He spent maybe 30 years as a um, prison psychologist, and exactly to the points that you were bringing up, he he says from his experience, criminals criminals become criminals because that's what they want. They he heavily sides on environment having an influence, but he also takes the unique approach to say criminals are placing themselves in those environments in order to carry out these, the things inside them that they want to do. So I join a gang because not because everybody around me necessarily is saying you should be in a gang, but I want to be part of that strength and power. So that's one. The other great book is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, who was an FBI negotiator, and it's a great read. He gets into how to influence people to your position and tells great stories along the way too. So he does a wonderful job of bringing that out.
Hmm. And yeah, the I'm going to add them to a growing a recommended list. That's some of my own personal favorites, but some of the guests who are clinicians and people who've been on all sorts of kind of journeys in their life. And it's really interesting as well. The way that the podcast is framed is that something's too light or too dark, and usually the truth kind of lies in that middle ground. And thinking about the stories that we've shared today, there's good and then there's evil. Well, no, there's somewhere in between, right? There's evil acts and there's good acts and there's good behavior and evil behavior, but really the truth of the human somewhere sits in the middle of that, right?
Oh, one thing that people forget is that criminals aren't criminals. They're people doing criminal activities. So we would be up on a phone tap on a drug dealer, and the one guy says, "Hey, I'm going to see you at 12, and I've got those 6 burritos for you." And guys are like, "The deal's going down," and it was burritos because you have to eat too, And we'd follow a guy. We're on surveillance, and the guy would go to a grocery store and said, "Let's see what's going on. Like maybe he's meeting somebody in a grocery store." I'm like, he's buying groceries.
Yeah.
So, here, 23.5 hours of the day, I am doing normal guy stuff. And then that half hour is when I'm doing criminal activity. And that's what people are like. It's how far are they going to keep going on that route, though, too?
For sure. Now, in Scotland, we say film, but nobody knows what I'm talking about. So, movies. What movie comes closest to portraying the truth in the world that you've inhabited? And maybe what do most movies get completely wrong at the same time?
So I'll go off the board and say television show.
Hmm.
So the TV show The Wire is very good to being realistic. That is, I mean, what's interesting is like that shows some of the gang work and how, I mean, just in practical terms, gangs use burner phones, how there's a hierarchy. Phenomenal series as well, but the phone taps, all of that is, learning the lingo and trying to decipher things. Very accurate.
Mm.
As far as what movies get wrong or films, the my youngest likes to watch Criminal Minds, which is a show about the FBI, and whenever she would turn it on, she says, "You have 5 complaints." And after you give your 5 complaints, shut up. and I run out in about 3 minutes. I'm like we'd never do this.
Mm.
So probably the biggest difference is we don't have a quirky goth girl who has a supercomputer that can look up anything. Um, there's usually like, and it makes sense because you got to be interesting. They just bypass judicial process
Of
and look
course.
up the information. Like I can get that through a subpoena, but that's not really very sexy. You see the 2-week process of finally getting the information. It's better to just tippy tap and, here's his phone number.
Now, I'd imagine I put on if imagine I was an FBI agent for the day, and yeah, what are some of your kind of ride along songs in that whip? Like, what music are you listening to into there? That really interested me. So yeah, give me a flavor of what that looks like, and then I suppose some music maybe that helped you decompress or take you away from that life at the same time.
The calm down music I love it, referred to as Americana, or true country music. Tyler Childers, Sturgill Simpson,
Mm.
Jason Isbell, Brandy Carlisle, like so many. And then my friend of mine and I would like share artists back and forth. Like, hey, have you heard Sam Barber? No, that let me get on. And so we'd be playing that. So that's the kind that usually is a more soulful reflection on actual events rather than singing about beers trucks and bikini girls or something. So that's what I would unwind with. When I was on the SWAT team, uh, I would have to get up at 1:30 in the morning, most operations, and drive about 2.5 hours across state to prepare. So uh, the music would get played to keep me awake sometimes, but otherwise, I'm audiobook and podcast guy to just keep my attention because I've got a long road ahead.
For sure. Now, to land our conversation today, I'll come to our desserts. Now, I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung and integrating the shadow. So maybe after everything you've seen, witnessed, learned about darkness in human nature, what have you learned about yourself in that process?
Uh, so one thing, as I mentioned, is the self-reflection, and that needs to be done. Uh, it was necessary in law enforcement because otherwise you're susceptible to some bad cynicism and some darkness. You have to walk that line otherwise of being stone cold and then unaccessible to your family or breaking down and crying all the time because you're too empathetic. And so there needed to be a self-reflection along the way. And I'm hoping that that's something to obviously carry further as a regular practice in my life of just recognizing what's going on with me rather than always having to observe, which is normal, what's going on with other people. That surveillance is built in to what I did for so long, but I need to think what's going on with myself. And as for just the perception of society, knowing that the people that I worked with in the church and the people that I investigated in many ways were the same. It's
Mm.
just that these ones would take a wrong step and say, Pastor, can you help me out? I don't want to be this person. And these folks were like, I'm all in, and would just keep going. So that's always going to be about repentance, to use a religious term. It's about turning yourself around, if you want to use a secular term, of knowing that everyone has that capacity. It is when you take that wrong step, are you adjusting yourself back to your values?
Yeah, and values, especially in today's world that can be so conflicted and so polarized, really attaching to them and revisiting them sometimes and working on them at the same time, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, and to land the point today, after your career, you've walked a line between light and dark. What does good even mean to you now? And how should the rest of us think about that?
I, people have their own definitions of good, whether that's going to be biblical, Quranic, from your upbringing. And I think that the evaluation of, if you can have mindfulness to say, are these actions I'm taking, are these intentions I have still running in compliance with what I believe in? Is this contrary, or is this in line? And I find myself and many other people too often are not driven by our values. We get driven by emotion, whether that's fear or anger. And so the emotion creates our actions. And then we go back and we try to justify it according to our values. But our values should be what dictate our actions. And then following our values should bring about the emotions that are going to follow, of satisfaction, of joy and happiness, maybe even of struggle if it was difficult. But we need to be driven by our values first, and that's going to be what brings about good.
Now, you mentioned book, and um, I've seen you post on social media and seen you interacting with all different types of people. Eric, how can people get in contact with you?
They can follow me, as you do, on Instagram at _Eric_Robinson. Amazed that that was available. They can see me on LinkedIn with Eric Robinson and maybe type FBI, and then you'll see this face there. Or they can go to my website, preacher2breacher.com, and you'll find it. Isn't that cute? Is
That's
that cute? Pretty good. I used to preach, and then I break down people's doors, so it works perfect.
Well, just to summarize, what I've heard today is a career like Eric's is built on discipline, exposure, steady commitment to things most people never see up close. It changes how I think about that, and undoubtedly how my listeners are going to think about that, how we read situations and how you understand people. But it doesn't have to define every part of who you become. Whether someone goes into it or just studies it from a distance, the important thread is the same: understanding behavior, staying grounded in reality, and learning how to carry complexity without losing direction. And when it's all said and done, what matters most isn't the intensity of the work, it's how you come out of it, still clear minded, still steady, and still able to live a life that isn't only shaped by what you've seen. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today, Eric, and to all our listeners. Stay gold, stay connected, and with love. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you.